very much for that. Yael was talking about how deep the oppression runs, and I think that's something that we're all learning more and more about, and have learned more and more about, is how the tendrils of state, but not just state, corporate media, political oppression and elites, how deep they run, which is an excellent introduction to the next panel speaker, who is Saghir Hussain, who is a solicitor specializing in terrorism and counter-extremism. He's an advisor to the campaigning organization Cage International and other civil society organizations. For those of you who aren't familiar with Cage, they support individuals adversely impacted by counter-terror practices and laws, and they've been doing that for over 20 years in response to the war on so-called terror. Their focus is on protecting the rule of law and due process, and historically, in the context of the war on terror, they've supported mostly the Muslim community, which is the community that's been predominantly targeted by the war on terror. But that focus is shifting as those on the supposed far left, that's environmentalists, us, anti-genociders, are also being increasingly targeted and are drawing on Cage's decades of expertise on this issue. So, welcome, Saghir. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for giving me the honor of inviting me here. I'm really glad and quite touched that people who are so dedicated to the cause of Palestine actually give their time and effort 24/7 to make their presence. So it's actually not the numbers, it's the actual camp and the fact that it's happening. I think that really resonates with the oppressors, whether it's across the road or whether those who are in Whitehall. So, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, following me is a real expert on terrorism laws. I've spoken to her, so I'm not going to jump into her areas, right? So,
no, you're the legal expert.
I'm the legal expert, so you can ask me questions later on, particularly if you want to, right? But I think one gap that I think I haven't seen enough addressed, and I'm in the little gatherings that I do, about 10, 15 people, I still try to say it, which is the ideology which brought us here. And that ideology, I think, has not been analysed, has not been properly sort of dissected, and for us to understand what's happening here. So the ideology is called neoconservatism, and neoconservatism is linked to neoliberalism. So it's an economic model and a political model in terms of how to model and manage your citizens or your taxpayers, or what they really think of you as serfs, right? So it's an ideology which says that actually only people in the West have got too much power, and they restrict the freedom of those who know best, the elites, the ruling class, to actually make the decisions that they need to make. So that's what I want to address. But I'll start off with this, and I'll go back to my original plan, how I was going to start. Last week's, although it wasn't technically an arrest, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell particularly, it wasn't an arrest, but when you're invited to the police station to give a voluntary interview, it's not really voluntary, because what they'll say is, if you don't come, we'll arrest you. So technically, yes, the leader of the opposition, former leader of the opposition, who had 40% of the general public on his side, electorate on his side at his peak, his shadow chancellor were arrested because they were protesting against a genocide that's been live streamed for 18 months throughout the world. So we've got billions of people around the world disgusted by what our government is participating in. So senior people, concerned people, organize marches and demonstrations, and now the state feels confident enough to actually go and arrest them and question them. Now, so that was last Saturday. I mean, I was really shocked last Saturday, and when I was watching it, I thought, oh my God, they really feel that they can get away with this. This is how far they've gone. So let's go backwards now from last week, 2025, to go back to the 1960s and 1970s. So how do we get here? Is the laws and policies that have been passed and the political rhetoric that has been used over decades and decades, which enable the police confident enough, enabled whoever gave orders in Whitehall the confidence that in Britain, land of Magna Carta, that we can actually get away with arresting the former leader of the opposition for protesting against genocide. So that's the urgency of the situation we're in, right? We look at sort of Belarus, we look at sort of banana republics, so we look at North Korea, and in a way, in a snobbish way, thinking, God, you know how bad it is, in a patronizing way. Yet here we are. Our cousins have elected a fascist. They do Nazi salutes. Right? They have people with Ku Klux Klan who no longer feel they need to wear the hoods occupying the White House. And we have people here, not from the Conservative Party, but the People's Party, the Labour Party, trade union funded party, going around saying, you know what, we're going to participate in a live stream genocide, and we're going to arrest the former leader of the opposition, who had 40% of the electorate on his side, because nobody can touch us. Now, what does that say about democracy? What does that say about accountability? What does that say about rule of law? What does that say about due process? So this is where my work with Cage comes in, right? Because we've been working on this for about 21 years. So what we discovered over those 21 years is, yes, the headline was Muslims. And let's be frank about this. We all have our prejudices, right? Whether it's racial prejudices, whether it's misogyny, whatever, people have prejudices, unconscious biases, all these sort of things. We have to be very honest with ourselves. We're not perfect, right? But we're separate from those who use their prejudices to make somebody else suffer. So we recognize our unconscious biases, but we also check ourselves thinking, you know what, I must be a fair person. That's where people who march in their hundreds of thousands, that's where they fit in. They are outraged by what's going on. Whatever they think, you know, this is inhumane, against my basic policy values. So they come on, but over the 21 years, very, very successfully, all the culture wars, all the dehumanization, all the propaganda was Muslims this, Islam's this, Muslims this, Islam this, and they played that card. And I have to say this, apart from Jeremy Corbyn and Jerry McDonald, the couple of years that we had, apart from that, all mainstream political opinion, all mainstream institutions, to a large extent, what we call the savior organizations, they all quietly collaborated with various governments as the infrastructure of those laws was expanded. Because you know why? It's those Muslims. So yeah, no judgment, let's pass them on. So that was 21 years, over the last 21 years, right? However, it goes beyond that. As I said, I want to go back to the 1960s, 1970s. What had happened was that the civil rights movement, and we see now in America how this attack on Vogue and diversity and all these sort of things is actually an attempt to roll back on the civil rights movement, the work gains that were given in the 60s and 70s by far-right extremists, you know what I mean, yeah? But the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement was deemed to be successful. It was deemed to be successful enough that it organized people in the numbers which caused discomfort to the warmongers, the ones who were killing hundreds of thousands of people and carpet bombing Vietnam and neighboring states. It was deemed to be uncomfortable for them. So what they said was, they called it a crisis of democracy. In other words, constitutionally, we are accountable to those who pay our taxes. That's a social contract. We have to listen to them, they can vote, they can demonstrate, they can withhold their taxes. So we have this. So therefore, This is restricting our discretions of what we want to do on public policy on important matters, because deep down these ruling classes look down on ordinary people as being ignorant and not being worthy of serious decision making. So therefore the pretense of democracy and all these sorts of own nonsense, because it's a cover, it's a deceit the ruling class use in order to buy our consent to trust them, to think that our public servants are acting in our best interests. Right, they're not. Right? The public interest is decided by a very narrow number of people, narrow groups, narrow institutions, narrow think tanks. What they do is, and then they spread it out to the wider public through the media owners that they have. So suddenly, what Chomsky said, consent is manufactured. So on the whole, whether it's Reagan or Thatcher or Clinton's, Biden's, consent is manufactured because they win, right? They become democratic leaders. But people, the stubborn people that they are, and I include racists, I include Islamophobes in the West, they are all absolutely disgusted by what Israel is doing. Because their humanity won't let them accept the blatant disregard for humanity and basic values that the Israelis are leading on, aided by the bombs from America, Britain and Germany in particular. Now this is a major problem. So this is why now the old infrastructure that's been put in place, because it's about those Muslims, is now going to come in handy, because all along the neoconservative ideology says, you know what, the elite, the ruling classes must be allowed to make important public policy decisions without being distracted by ordinary people. They don't know. Blair actually said that, and I'm trying to find the way he actually said it, but Tony Blair actually said that. He said, ordinary people, they love to talk nice, they think that they want to be humane, they want to be very saintly, but when we don't give them the material benefits they get at home, they turn against us. In other words, he's saying we're acting in the wider good. Our NHS, our good roads, our good infrastructure, our education is based upon looting weak nations. And therefore, ordinary people start getting holier than thou, but if we don't do it, then our economy goes down and these people turn on us. So that's their thinking. So it's an ideology which recognizes that ordinary people are a threat to the ruling class. It has been building up its power base for a very long time. And in the 70s and 80s, we had what's called a COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO is a forerunner, in my opinion, of PREVENT, which is basically by hook or crook, the state, through spy cops, FBI, everybody, disrupts anybody who organizes political organizations against the state. We don't break the law, obviously, right? But it's dangerous for them because they don't like anybody organizing, right? So what they were doing, I won't be very long, I think I'm going. What they were doing was, this is what people like, look at people like Kissinger, Huntington, and others, and the book called Crisis of Democracy, right? They'll give you all this, I think. What they were doing is, in the 70s and 80s, they couldn't push that line too much because they were at a battle of ideas with the Soviet Union over communism. Because they knew people in the West were attracted by socialism and communism. So in order to win hearts and minds, said, look, we, the Western elites, we give you citizens' liberties, we give you freedom of choice, which in the East they won't give you. Therefore, we are a better system of governance. So in the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of emphasis on liberties, freedoms, freedom of choice, all these things to buy people's consent to remain anti-Soviet Union, anti-communist, right, anti-socialist. But as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War was won, my legal career started. So I've actually been documenting all along all the things I learned at university about rule of law and due process gradually being eroded during the course of my practice. So that was the 1990s, long before 9/11. So they passed laws in the Public Order Act now about 1996, which says that presumption of innocence, where the citizen is has a right to say that the state must not invade my private space unless a well-defined crime has been committed or is about very near to being committed. That rule was broken in the mid-1990s. Then you had the Patriot Act. Then you had the Terrorism Act of 2000. All before 9/11, this was in line because the Soviet Union was no longer a threat, and Labour Party no longer had to pretend that it was an alternative to conservative rule. So in the end, they were the one party, along with the Democrats in America, they're fully implementing what's called a neoconservative ideology. But it's economic neoliberalism and on the internationally gunboat diplomacy, and here a very authoritarian state. So all this nonsense for 30 years about left wing, right wing, are very annoying. You're thinking you're missing the picture, right? The Labour Party is not left wing. Yes, you had Jeremy Corbyn, yes, but it's never been left wing since the post-war was taken away, right? So why are we, all the trade unions, all these other activists, playing along as if left and right? We don't have those options. The options now are a very authoritarian state where the ruling class decide what's good for you, what's not good for you, right? Or a weak state which trusts, right, the citizens. And this is where we got to work. Our community organizations, our camps are very, very important. We have to build our communities. We have to do this because the alternative is what they use is libertarianism, and libertarianism is actually a cover for the corporate state to actually take over running of the state. And as you know, corporatism, the alliance of big business and government, what's that? That's what Mussolini would say is fascism. That's where we're at. Fascist corporate security state with a pretense of elections where you choose between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who support a genocide openly, or Donald Trump, who doesn't wear Ku Klux Klan cap anymore, and who's uncertain about what he's going to do. He's going to ethnically cleanse or bomb them, or he's going to go to Netanyahu. And at home, we have conservatives, Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak, or security state lobbyists, Keir Starmer. So there's no democracy. Rule of law, you see, with the terrorism law has been eroded. So we've gone through a constitutional and a cultural change in the last 50, 60 years. And yet, remember what we say about North Korea, remember what we say about all those poor countries, all poor people with their no independent press. People have been brainwashed into thinking they have freedoms, they have liberties. And what you people and all the people who are marching are showing that actually there are enough people who are still awake, still got the courage, and I recognize that Octavia yourself who take the risks and say, no, we are not going to accept what's happening in front of us. And I commend you all, and I thank you all for actually inviting me in.